Chris Brown, Matty Glab with you, and pleased to be joined now by NFL draft analyst for ESPN, one Matt Miller, who's making the rounds here. It's a busy week for him, as you might imagine, but thanks for giving us some time, Matt. Appreciate it. Why don't we start big picture here, just to begin, and if you had to put, let's just pretend you're the editor of, an old school newspaper, and you got to put a theme on this draft class this year, what would you say is the biggest thing that we should take from this group?
Yeah, offensive star power is the biggest thing. We're going to see a draft. Obviously, you guys are picking a little bit later in the first round, but we're going to see a draft that's dominated early by quarterbacks, which you don't need one. You're pretty good there, right? Wide receiver, which I think is something of interest to Bills fans, and then offensive tackle. I mean, we could see 5 quarterbacks, 6, 7, 8 wide receivers, and 6, 7, 8 offensive tackles drafted in the first round. If you do some quick math, that's like 20 of the 32 picks. So it's really going to be dominated by offense and by those blue chip positions.
So if you're a Bills fan, you're hoping those quarterbacks kind of move up the board, get taken maybe before the Bills are on the clock at that number 28 spot, and hoping some of those offensive tackles get taken in the teens and the 20s there, so that there's some wide receivers available for the Bills at number 28. It's been a popular position mock to the Bills so far, but aside from wide receiver, or you can include wide receiver in this, I want your take on any favorite prospects that you have for the Bills at 28 and why.
Oh my gosh, yes, I will go wide receiver.
Yes.
Adonai Mitchell, and I tweeted about this week. Adonai Mitchell from Texas is a 6'4" receiver who I was talking to his trainers. They were hand timing him, which can be a little different than electronic timing, in the 4.35 second range in the 40-yard dash, and that speed shows up on tape. So when I think, and I'm one of the biggest Josh Allen fans outside of Buffalo, New York, I think. But when I think about Josh, I would love for him to have that reliable, consistent, deep threat, somebody that can stretch the field because Josh has the strongest arm in football, but also someone who can take some of those slant routes and turn them into house calls. Somebody can take that's where the game is going. Like, everyone wants to play too deep. I want a wide receiver who is going to hit that hitch and they can make someone miss and has the speed to run away, and that's who Adonai Mitchell is.
Yeah, and for a guy who doesn't have a wide upper body frame, that kind of thing. His lower half is really muscular. Like, everybody's talking about, he's going to jump out of the gym on the vertical leap and kill it.
The former basketball background is there. I mean, and my favorite thing about Mitchell, so he was at Georgia and then transferred to Texas. So you've seen him play against Alabama quite a bit because of that. Every game against Alabama was like the best game of his career. So it's like, you want to see best versus best? Well, Alabama's pretty good.
Well, I got 2 corners that are going to go in the first 2 days of the draft.
Exactly.
So, it's great. As you mentioned, 7 offensive tackles, 6 corners, 6 quarterbacks in your top 50.
Yeah.
How much can those they're in-demand positions. We know that. They're premium positions. Matty touched on it. How much can they push talent down to Buffalo at 28? We already kind of examined receiver, but let's just say the value isn't there at receiver when they're on the clock at 28, and they got to shift to maybe defensive line where they have 8 free agents. What could get pushed down to them conceivably, maybe at edge or defensive interior?
Yeah, I mean, I think edge is the one spot where, and you guys, like, Brandon Beane is going to have a campaign of, hey, J.J. McCarthy and Bo Nix are pretty good quarterbacks. If we didn't have Josh Allen,
you want them
we
early.
would be looking at those guys. You want to push them up the board. So I do think edge rushers, an interesting one this week will be UCLA pass rusher Leatu Latu, who I think is the most NFL ready of the pass rushers, but he's got the neck injury that forced him to medically retire when he was at Washington. But he's been healthy the last 2 years, so you feel good about that. A player I fell in love with, and I should have known better because I'm a Missouri guy, at the Senior Bowl, Darius Robinson. 6'5", 290 pounds. He can play on the edge. He can play on the inside. He could do it all, and he does it at a high level. So you actually, a lot of times we used to call guys tweeners. It's like, we don't really know where to put them, and you lose a little bit of something. With Robinson, you don't lose anything because he has the speed and the power to play any spot on the D-line.
Elite physical trait guy.
Elite physical traits. He'll have a great week here. But also, not just someone who was just the most athletic player on the line. Again, playing SEC football, you have to have technique. You have to know how to use your hands, and he does that really well.
He also is a stand-up guy who seems like he could be a great leader on a team like the Bills as well. It was really nice to hear from him today when he was speaking on the podium. In your latest mock draft, I know it was a while ago, but you mocked the Bills a center at number 28 and Jackson Powers Johnson. Mitch Morse is getting up there in his career. You talk about Missouri guys. He's another one of those. Yeah. He's getting up there in his career. Has 1 year left on his contract, I believe, Brownie.
Yes.
Why did you decide center there?
Yeah, and I think with Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon, the nice thing is he could play center or guard. He's 334 pounds, which would be a big change from Mitch and would be one of the biggest centers in the NFL. But he could come in and play guard immediately. And I actually look at this offensive line as good enough, but you always want to get better on the offensive line. Turn that into a strength, especially with Joe Brady running the offense. I think we saw last year a lot more of the run game later in the season. Obviously, you're going to get some of that in the playoffs, but having that powerful, whether it be a right guard or eventually a center to replace Mitch Morse, I think that's just one of those bookend positions, and the value is fantastic. I have colleagues who think that JPJ could be a top 20 pick, so here he is at this spot. Really, really good value.
Defensive line depth. I know we already kind of covered defensive line and the needs for the Bills. They play a rotational system, so guys roll through all the time. And with 8 free agents out of the 12 players that were on their roster last year, they're not going to be able to get enough free agents to fill all the holes. So knowing you need rookies to at least play a role for you, and they're in the lineup, and they're getting 40% of the snaps maybe on defense every week, how long can you wait where you can still get a guy that could do that for you in the draft?
I think it depends. Edge rusher, you're probably actually looking at 28. Edge rusher or wide receiver. I think defensive tackle, this is a unique year that Byron Murphy from Texas is probably going to go in the top 20. And then you have Jerzon Newton, who I actually think is a pretty good fit for the Bills scheme. Yeah. He's a lot like Ed Oliver coming out of Illinois. He could be there at 28. After that, there's a group of guys that are all kind of in that like middle of round 2, like Leonard Taylor from Miami. You know, so it's like, okay, there are guys here. McKinley Jackson from Texas A&M is another one, where it's like, gosh, I don't feel great about them as a top 50 pick. So maybe later round 2 is where they can actually come in.
The Bills pick 60.
That's great news for the Bills is that second tier defensive tackles isn't coming off the board early round 2. It's more likely late round 2.
Awesome. That's the best news we heard all week.
I'm glad I can help. Okay, sounds good.
Thanks for that.
Check that box. The Chiefs are a team who, over the last couple of seasons, have had to get a lot younger through the draft and then play those young draft picks because you have a quarterback in Patrick Mahomes who demands money, and his contract reflects that. Josh Allen is starting to get into that part of his contract, knowing where the Bills are at with that, as well as their cap number. You're paying other guys like Von Miller and Stephon Diggs. What can the Bills learn from a Chiefs team who have had to do that in the last couple of years? Yeah. The Bills may have to do that as well.
I think one thing the Chiefs did really well was identify what types of players their coaches wanted. You know, okay, we have Steve Spagnuolo. Let's get guys who fit what he wants. You know, they went with long, athletic players on the defensive line. In the secondary, they wanted guys who were fast, but also guys who were really smart and played a lot of different positions in college, so that they were able to step right in. Not just, a Trent McDuffie who's a first-round pick, but, to find a L'Jarius Sneed, to find a Jalen Watson. So I think that's the lesson is, getting that continuity in your coaching staff to where you can say, okay, what kind of guys does Joe Brady want? What kind of players do we want on defense for this scheme? You mentioned, you're going to have a wave of pass rushers. What does that profile look like? Yeah. Is there a length that you want? Is there a certain 3-cone time that you want? And then building it out that way. I think that's one of the undertold stories of how well Kansas City is drafted is they're drafting guys that just fit their scheme so well.
We have a guy that stepped into the lineup this year to take over for Tremaine Edmonds, had a fantastic season in Terrell Bernard, a former third-round pick. Linebacker isn't a major need for Buffalo, but Tyrell Dodson's a free agent. Tyler Matakevich, their special teams ace, is a free agent. So they've got guys that are coming off the roster, and Matt Milano, Brandon Beam was telling us yesterday, well, by the time the pads are back on, that's probably when we're going to see him. So we're not talking until training camp at the earliest that we're going to see Milano coming back from that leg injury that he suffered last season in Week 5 in London. So linebacker is kind of a sneaky need that's sitting there, but not something that they necessarily want to address early. I know it's not a great linebacker class for off-the-ball guys.
It's not good.
But is there anybody sitting there, early day 3 that may merit some consideration to at least play a backup role, special teams kind of role for the Bills at linebacker?
I look at someone like Jalen Ford coming out of Texas. You mentioned Matt Milano. I think Matt is one of the best coverage linebackers in the NFL. Jalen Ford had 6 interceptions the last 2 years at Texas and is someone that can drop into coverage, can control that middle of the field. He's got really good arm length to take away some of those passing windows. Now, he's available in the 4th round because I think he can be a touch slow processing, especially in the run game.
Okay.
But the coverage ability stands out. And so I think day 3, that's what I'm always looking for. What is your standout trait? What is something that we can build on as a player? Terrell Bernard certainly had that. So I think Ford in round 4, maybe he comes up a little earlier, but as you were saying, it's not a good linebacker class. We're not going to see a first-round pick, I don't believe. We're probably going to see 2 maybe in the top 50, and then it's, we're waiting for those tiers to come off.
Let's go back to last year's draft. The Bills drafted Dalton Kincaid with their first pick that they had in the first round. And then they also drafted Osiris Torrence out of Florida. Both of those guys drafted earlier on, and they played quite a bit of time starting. Osiris Torrence definitely played every single snap last season. What did you think of their play, how they were kind of, put out there from the beginning, but also did a great job with their first season in the NFL?
Torrence was one of my favorite players in the draft last year just because of the physicality that he played with. I mean, he played with an attitude, I'll say, every snap, and it showed up. And I think that carried over to his readiness in the NFL coming out of that Billy Napier run system to where he was able to step in and contribute right away. Dalton Kincaid, we can have a conversation about positional value at the tight end spot, but I think what he can do in conjunction with Dawson Knox, he's going to play a lot in the slot. He's just going to be a pass game weapon more than a traditional tight end. So I thought both guys, did great. Dalton is someone that's going to have a really, really bright future. We see how many great young tight ends there are in the NFL, and he's, I think, at the top of that list, or could very well be at the top of the list. He and Sam Laporta are the guys who could kind of take over that position as we see the Travis Kelce's and George Kittle start to, get to maybe the tail end of their careers.
Day 3 depth, second question, because I already asked you about linebacker. Safety is a position that's kind of in a state of flux here for the Bills for the first time in a long time. Micah Hyde probably contemplating retirement. Jordan Poyer's got a fat cap number. We don't know how that's going to play out. And then even some of their depth players at safety are free agents, Cam Lewis among them. So maybe walk me through maybe some day 3 value at safety. Again, I know it's not a safety class where you're looking for frontline people. I expect the Bills to fill the holes in free agency for safety, but just guys you can have on your depth chart that can, again, play on teams at the safety spot.
The nice thing for Bills fans about the safety position this year is that none are going to be drafted early. We could actually go through the first 2 rounds without a safety drafted.
Wow.
So that talent's going to get pushed down. So guys like Tyler Nubin from Minnesota, Cam Kinchens from Miami, you're looking at them and thinking, hey, these guys are going to be top 50 picks. They might be round 3 picks, and that's going to push down a Javon Bullard from Georgia. It's going to push down a James Williams from Miami to where you're looking at, sitting there in round 4 like, gosh, there's only 2 safeties drafted so far. So you might actually have the pick of the litter. One of my favorites is Kalen Bullock from USC, who's a great ball hawk, just not a good tackler. And it's not that he doesn't want to tackle. I just don't know that anyone has taught him how yet. So if he can get that figured out, he could be a starting NFL safety who does have some of that Micah Hyde ball hawk mentality.
Yeah, and he runs down people in the open field, too. I saw like a bunch of tackles he made. You think the guy's gone for a touchdown, and he runs them down. I was impressed by that. I'm very curious to see how he times. Matt, thanks for all the insight. We appreciate it. Of course. Kind of paint the picture for us, especially on day 2 and day 3. You hear all the day 1 stuff? Thanks for knowing the whole class.
That's the fun part, right?
Yeah, it is. And the most unpredictable part, too, to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Appreciate the time as always. That's ESPN NFL draft analyst Matt Miller joining us.